By 1523, Martin Luther was a hunted man. The Pope had declared him a heretic, and the Kaiser labeled him an outlaw, making any association with him a capital offense. His theological challenge to the Church was rapidly dismantling centuries of tradition, specifically the rigid enforcement of clerical celibacy for monks and nuns. Among those following these developments was Catherine von Bora. She had lived within the walls of the Cistercian convent at Nimschen since the age of 9, effectively isolated from the outside world. When Luther's arguments reached the convent, the abstract debate over theology turned into a physical crisis. For Catherine and her peers, believing in the Reformation meant they were now captives seeking a way to escape their vows and the convent itself. 12 of the Nimschen nuns managed to smuggle a message directly to Luther, pleading for him to facilitate their escape. On Easter evening in 1523, a merchant named Leonard Kappa drove a wagon into the convent. He hid the nuns inside empty herring barrels and drove them out past the guards under the cover of night. Once they reached Wittenberg, Luther took responsibility for the women, successfully finding husbands or homes for almost all of them. Catherine von Bora was the exception. She rejected every suitor Luther suggested, including a local pastor he strongly encouraged her to marry. She eventually made her intentions clear through a third party. She would only accept a proposal from Dr. Luther himself. Luther hesitated for months. He lived under a constant death warrant and feared that marriage would simply leave a widow and orphans in a state of extreme danger. He finally relented in 1525, telling a friend he would take his Kate to wife to spite the devil and affirm his teachings on marriage. The marriage forced an immediate collision between the high-stakes work of a religious revolutionary and the daily requirements of physical and economic survival. The couple moved into the Black Cloister, a massive, decaying former monastery. Luther's finances were a wreck. He refused all royalties for his books and lived on a meager, unsteady salary while giving away what little he had to anyone in need. Catherine immediately assumed control of the property's administration. She repaired the run-down structure, converting it into a combination of a family home, a boarding house for students, and a hospital for the sick. To sustain the household, she diversified their resources. She turned neglected fields into a productive garden and began keeping cows to produce milk, butter, and cheese for the local market. She expanded the estate further by planting a fruit orchard and even digging and stocking a fish pond to provide a reliable source of protein. She also managed a piggery to provide meat for the table, leading Luther to jokingly call her "My Lord Kate, mistress of the pigsty." These operations provided the financial floor that Luther's haphazard spending and refusal of royalties had previously destroyed, turning a potentially bankrupt household into the stable base of operations for the Reformation. Domestic life required managing Luther's obsessive work habits. He was known to ignore his meals for hours while debating theology with guests, often leaving the food to grow cold. Catherine's strict enforcement of mealtimes forced Luther to sit and converse with his students in a relaxed, unscripted setting. Because she provided this structured environment, students were able to record the discussions that became the book Table Talk, a text that preserved Luther's most candid insights. Beyond the logistics, Catherine managed Luther's volatile health and mental state. He suffered from chronic physical ailments and frequent bouts of deep, paralyzing depression. During one period of extreme despair, Catherine met him at the door wearing black mourning clothes. When Luther asked who had died, she replied that God must have died, because Dr. Luther would not be so sorrowful otherwise. This psychological intervention broke his cycle of worry. Her ability to challenge his despair served as a necessary safeguard, keeping the leader of the Reformation functional through his most difficult years. Over 20 years, the marriage grew into a partnership of mutual reliance. Luther's letters to her were filled with respect for her intelligence, often addressing her as "my gracious housewife" or "the deeply learned Mrs. Catherine Luther." The reality of this thriving home life changed the content of Luther's work. His sermons began to use the daily experiences of marriage and parenting as primary illustrations for Christian living. When Luther died in 1546, Catherine's management skills were tested further. She endured the loss of her cattle and farm during the Schmalkaldic War and survived the return of the plague to Wittenberg. Catherine died in 1552 following a wagon accident while fleeing the plague. She was buried in St. Mary's Church in Torgau, where her monument remains today. By stabilizing the chaos of Luther's life, Catherine engineered the Protestant parsonage, a social structure that established the clerical family as a central pillar of Western civilization.